nobody's painting me pictures of plausible off ramps. Nobody tells me that, yeah, we can de-escalate. It just isn't on the table. It just seems like we only have one gear, and it's escalation in both of these conflicts. And then we have the fact that Trump is embroiled in this scandal and he needs to do anything to divert his attention. It just sounds like we are heading straight along into this. But if that's true, if this is really likely, like if what we're saying is actually true, that this could happen, we should all be screaming from the rooftops, right? This could be the end of the world, right? And this isn't hyperbole. If we get into a direct confrontation with Russia, or even like with what's going to might happen with Iran, with the close of the Strait of Hormuz, like chaos is going to spread. But I feel like nobody is acting like that's going to happen. It just seems like it's impossible. Like, oh, you're just fear mongering. These are just doomsayers. But whenever we have these conversations, I'm like, oh my God, this could actually happen. But even myself, like, I go get in my car and go buy groceries for the week. I'm not stocking up and getting a generator and prepping, but maybe I should. Or maybe I pack up my family and, move to South Africa or something. Like, if I truly was thinking that a nuclear war is possible or imminent, World War III, I feel like I should be making these moves. But even myself, when I have these conversations, I don't do anything because I'm like, there's just no way, right? No way. But I just got to watch it and just respond as it evolves. But then I don't want to wait till all of a sudden I'm like, oh, damn it. Whoops, here it comes. Didn't buy my bunker,
Right. Well, yeah, I don't know what to say. I'm not going to give advice on stocking up and, digging holes in your backyard or anything. I'm not saying any advice one way or the other. But probably it won't happen. I think it's still, the horror of nuclear war. It's the destruction that could be unleashed is such that it, so far for a good, 80 years, it has prevented any country from taking that step. Right. Since 1945, we haven't seen it happen. There was the dawn of the atomic age then, and there was a great deal of fear, which is very well placed. We have this enormous, this incredibly destructive new weapon that has been unleashed, and it's now in the hands of, sinful humanity. But just the knowledge of its destructiveness has prevented it from being used. And maybe that will continue to prevent it from being used. But there is, there is a reason to be afraid. And I think, first of all, it's just the cavalier attitude and the lack of alarm, which you were just pointing out. Again, as I remember, as a kid and as a young man, fear of nuclear war was real. People talked about it. People were genuinely worried about it. And it was something that was discussed, in the public forum, that was debated. And because we took it seriously, well, you could say we did the responsible thing, and we signed these treaties with the Soviet Union. And by doing so, we greatly reduced the chance of nuclear war. Now, these treaties have, one after another, have expired or have been broken. The last one, and maybe the most important start, is already it's parts of certain provisions are no longer being observed by the parties, and it's due to expire, I believe, what is it, next year? And there's just not even a talk of renewing it. And then, more than that, again, it's just, okay, the treaties that protected us are ceasing to exist. We don't have that protection. But more importantly, that fear, and that very healthy fear, seems to be gone. Instead, the attitude in the West is that raising the specter of nuclear war is just a Russian talking point, because that helps Putin. Right. Everything is reduced to this. It's just like, again, it's another example of how we no longer live in the real world, but we live in the world of narratives. Okay. And the narrative is that Putin is evil, and that he's, anything that he says is just part of some sort of diabolical scheme to get us to accede to his demands. And so if the Russians say, hey, there is a real danger of nuclear war here, it's just like Russian talking point. We're not listening. Yeah, it's all a bluff. And you say, well, in the past, you would hear something like that and say, maybe it's a bluff, but there's a small chance that it's true. And that small chance has to be considered and actually has to be feared because the consequences are so huge. But we just don't get that, very realistic kind of adult, mature response that we had in the past. The response is cavalier. The response is somebody who doesn't really have a firm grip on reality, doesn't really believe in reality anymore. Everything's about narratives. So that does make me worried. We just don't. We have a real conflict in Europe that's escalating. We don't have that healthy fear. We don't have the treaties. Yeah, there's reasons to be afraid that something could go wrong. Maybe in the end, it's just like, well, people will wake up, from this kind of self-imposed delusion, and say, hey, we can't do this. Nuclear war is a really bad idea. Maybe we'll go all the way to the edge. Maybe we'll go just, we'll do the JASSMs or something, but not the extended range, and then they're thinking about the tomahawks, and the people, in the administration are making the arguments for them and striking Moscow and making Putin really feel the pain, so-called Putin, when, it'll be real Russians that are going to die. And then maybe at that point, I just hope, maybe I'm a fool, but just hope against hope that they'll say, hey, yeah, we can't do this, guys. Let's see, nuclear war is real, and, it could be the end of us all, or even if it's not the end of us all, it could be tens of millions of dead people, hundreds of millions, who knows? Let's not do this. And then perhaps we say, okay, let's fold it in. Let's fold it up. Let's go home. Let's do something else. That may happen, but it's just like, you feel like you can't really count on that, right?
No, yeah, no, I don't feel reassured at all. You're going to say, why nuclear war or World War III won't happen. And the problem is, I say World War III or nuclear war, but in my mind, if there is a real war with the West, with NATO, it's going to have to go nuclear because we don't have the capability to fight a war. And I think that's what makes it so scary, is that the reality is that NATO is not capable of waging a conventional war. And people can cry all they want about it, but it's just true. We just do not have the industrial capacity to wage a conventional war. We are already desperately low on pretty much everything across the board, from artillery shells to ATACMs to Patriot interceptors to THAADs. Like, I heard it's going to take 10 years to replace the amount of THAADs that we used to protecting Israel. And that was just 12 days. So this whole thing, like, if we want to go to war, it's going to be the option is nuclear, because we're already at the limit where it's like, what do we have? JASSMs and Tomahawks, long range. And then even when you're firing Tomahawks, Russia, knows that these are nuclear capable weapons. So that's real risky. I just don't. Yeah. Every time I try to ask you, like, okay, maybe I'm being irrational, walk us back how this is not going to happen. You always say, like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. Then you proceed to explain exactly how I think it's going to happen. That we move up the side. And I'm like, well, now I don't feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I again, perhaps again, I'm naive and I'm just, foolishly optimistic. I don't think it's going to happen, but you have to admit that the situation is scary. It really is scarier than it ever has been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think people who really, who look at these things closely agree it is. I know, what is it that, for whatever it's worth, there's that doomsday clock, right? That is showing that I think it's closer to midnight. Midnight means, nuclear Armageddon. It's closer to midnight than it has been, I think, ever since this was started. That may not mean anything, but it shows that there are others, it's not just a few weird guys with podcasts that are talking about this. That's what people who analyze these kind of things for a living are seeing. There are some very disturbing trends. The fact, again, just the treaties we're talking, and the introduction of these new, of hypersonic missiles. Again, the West hasn't caught up with that, but I'm assuming that they will. And then if you have hypersonic missiles, installed in Europe, they can strike Moscow in, 5 minutes or something like that. It just puts, um, that just gives no chance. There's just no margin for error. The Russians see a missile, or they believe that, a missile's coming at them, a hypersonic missile, and it's heading right for Moscow. What are they supposed to do? They have to make a decision within just a couple of minutes. Do we assume this is nuclear or not? It just puts the whole world on right there on
Hair trigger.
on the hair trigger, exactly. That's what these treaties were supposed to prevent. That's why we had the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and that has expired. The U.S. just simply abrogated. So that's. But we need to bring those back. We need to start. Really. I think what happened actually was with on the Western side is that they became so arrogant. There's assumption that, again, we don't really need to constrain ourselves. We can simply do what we want, and then Russia will have to accept the consequences. And we are the superior side. And, we don't want to, when you sit down at a negotiating table and then you work out a treaty, you're actually and you're recognizing the legitimacy of the other side, and you also are just showing some respect for their strength. This is something that we need to do for our mutual benefit, and these negotiations will treat yourselves as equals. That's what negotiations have to be based on, that on mutual benefit and the principle of essentially equality. We abandoned that. Again, I think it's a product of the hyperpolar, the unipolar moment is what I mean to say. Our experience of being the hyperpower. There's just no need to constrain ourselves in any way. But in the end, it was very foolish. It was just like when we ripped up those treaties, the Russians said, okay, well, we're going to have to develop some new weapons. They went ahead and developed them, and that we haven't, So now they're actually in the driver's seat. It was very, very foolish. But they would be willing if we said, okay, let's sit down and let's negotiate a treaty. Now, the problem is the Russians actually pulled out a part of the start because of the proxy war in Ukraine. You say, it does not make sense, they said, if you are actually engaged in hostile actions against us, for us to observe this treaty, or certain parts of it. By doing so, you essentially violated the treaty, because the treaty is, the basis of the treaty is that we actually we're not engaged in hostilities against each other. The treaty is supposed to prevent that, but you are engaging in hostilities against us. You are using Ukraine as a proxy against us. And in fact, you've gone beyond. Of course, that happened later with the direct attacks on Russia. So, if we're going to negotiate these treaties, first of all, we're going to have to settle the war in Ukraine and stop using Ukraine as a proxy. That's the first step. And then, we can try to rebuild. We can try to create these, these protections that once exist, and to recreate them, establish new ones that have to deal with new technologies. And we're close to doing that now. We're actually headed in the opposite direction. So again, I guess whenever I say I don't think it's going to happen, then I point out that it's sort of like, I don't know, we're going down a mountain road, and the brakes start going out, and I say, well, I think we're going to make it to the bottom. You're a real good driver or whatever, but there's reasons to be pretty scared.
Do you think Trump's a really good driver if we're in the car with him, though? That's what's so scary, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like,
right. No, it is scary. It's not fair to call him a warmonger. I don't think he really is, but he is very susceptible. He clearly can be persuaded by these people around him who are warmongers. And as we said earlier, the fact that he's been weakened by this domestic scandal makes him more vulnerable to their persuasions.
The thing that's strange is that when we talk about the Cold War, there was this healthy fear of nuclear war, and that's what produced all these treaties. And
Hmm.
now you're saying that, not just, crazies all doing podcasts talking about the threat of nuclear war, but experts have put the clock as close to midnight as it's ever been to nuclear war. But there is no healthy fear of it. Even amongst, like what I was just saying, even kind of amongst us that are aware of the problem. I don't feel like we are acting like people that if the clock is really that close to midnight, why aren't we behaving differently? I don't know if part of it is just that we can't even countenance the idea of nuclear war
Yeah.
because we have mad mutually assured destruction, or that because of the hyperpower has led to this mentality that we can't even countenance the concept of of us not being able to impose our will in any way. So we're just lulled into this strange state of mind where all the evidence is pointing as that we are getting very close to a very dangerous situation, but nobody's behaving like it's a dangerous situation.
No, I think that's true. I mean, within the dissident community, and I think probably you have to, I think the one who has been ringing this alarm bell the loudest is Scott Ritter. This
I was
is
going to say
something
Scott.
he was
We need more
involved.
Scott.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's something he
Yeah.
does very well. Remember, he was a weapons inspector. He was involved in actually in formulating and implementing these treaties in the past. So that's something where he really knows what he's talking about, and he has been raising the alarm bells. But yeah, again, it's just you do not find it within the establishment, and I think it is just this smugness on one side, and it's just also this. Um, Again, it's a victory of the narrative over reality. And in the narrative, talking about the threat of nuclear war, that helps the Russians, so we don't talk about it. So, that's what happens. And if you bring it up, you're obviously working for the Kremlin, which is just absurd. It's just like a healthy fear of nuclear war is not a Russian talking point. I think Tom Woods said that very well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, once again, every time we try to talk, try to find some peace
Yeah,
of
I'm
mind,
sorry.
you convince me that we're
Yeah.
heading towards something
Yeah. Maybe,
scarier.
yeah, again, you're right. There's nothing inevitable. It's not like, this is maybe where sometimes I will disagree with Scott Ritter. It's like he talks, well, if this happens, then definitely there'll be nuclear war. There's always agencies. There's always agency, there's free will. And people can pull back from the abyss. And maybe that's what I'm relying on. Maybe I'm relying on that too much, that in the end, when we stare
Yeah,
into the abyss, we'll pull back. Um, I
yeah.
guess one
It's
thing
just
that I
how
do
much
worry
free
about,
will.
yeah,
Go on.
yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, well, one thing I do worry about is actually if we were conventionally stronger, then I would be less worried about it. But as you pointed out, it's just that our conventional weaponry, it has been so depleted, and it's also proved to be, much less effective than we had previously had imagined. And so, yeah, again, like our missile force, our conventional missile force, we talk about the Tomahawk and, a few other systems. But we've seen these other systems like the ATACMS, they've just been almost entirely neutralized by the Russians. And probably, the Tomahawks they'll learn how to neutralize that too. Um, but the Russians really have taken the lead in missile technology. They have the hypersonics, they have the Zircon and the Kinjal, and they have their Iskander has been modified so that it's just virtually impossible to shoot down at this point. It's faster. I guess it has a stealth coating. It takes these evasive maneuvers at the end. It drops decoys, and the Ukrainians themselves are admitting they just can't shoot it down. So they have these very advanced systems, which they've perfected through the war. And then they have, of course, the Reshnik. So they have this very powerful conventional, missile force, very powerful. So they have a lot of options before going nuclear, and we just don't. And that kind of puts it like if you're deprived, if you don't have the conventional force, but you still have, hundreds of nuclear warheads, then the temptation to go nuclear is greater. So you just look at the kind of the structure of incentives or just the weapons that are at our disposal. uh, very quickly we can find ourselves in a situation where we realize we just really don't have anything to stop the Russian march to the west of Ukraine or whatever it is that's causing everyone to shriek. We don't have, we don't have the conventional alternative. And then you say, well, we do have nuclear. Maybe we could do something like a tactical nuclear. We won't actually have a nuclear war, but the temptation, and you just know that some of these crazies are going to be arguing. This is what we can't have to do. If we don't, it's like the end of American hegemony. They may not use those actual words, but that's what they're thinking. So, I'm sorry. I still, I guess, I may be convincing. I was trying to
we're
feel.
So screwed. We're so screwed.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess the more I think about it, the more the reasons are worried. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and you talk. I was going to say, you're talking about these people having agency and free will. It's like, well, there's this question on how true that is. If there is real blackmail on someone like Trump, it's like, well, how much agency does he really have? And then, even if his instincts are to avoid nuclear war, well, if it's his legacy and his ego at stake, you'll try to find any way out to, like, maybe I can get the best of both worlds. I can be the Winston Churchill, as well. Right. It's like, and then
I don't see how he would be blackmailed into doing it, because, if there's blackmail, it's probably going to be like Mossad, and it's going to, if we see action as a result of direct blackmail, it's probably going to be in the Middle East. Again, I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but if it's going to be blackmail, that's where it's going to be. But just finding himself, like his approval numbers are plummeting, his own base is turning against him, and he knows, he just. So these guys come and say, hey, I've got this great plan. You're going to be a hero. Just like you're going to be a hero. You're going to be the next Winston Churchill. This is going to be, and everybody's going to stop talking about Epstein, and they're going to be singing your praises. They're going to be building statues to you. You're going to be the next face on Mount Rushmore. You know how they're going to go after him. And it just, you're right. The worse the domestic scandals get, the lower his his approval rating is, the more likely, the more vulnerable he is to that kind of pressure.
Right. The lower his approval rating go, we can look at that kind of the threshold for acceptance of engaging in some type of thing is lowered as well. So, it's terrifying. I don't know if you've seen. I just saw this morning on RT that. What was the story? My mind just went blank. Oh yes, it was about that Trump is reducing that 50-day threshold that he imposed on on Russia, saying that 50 days to come with a deal before, I don't know, secondary tariffs, sanctions, escalation of something, and then he just said, like, oh, that number is going to be shorter now. Why do you think he's saying that? Is that a sign that Ukraine is collapsing and that he is feeling he needs to intervene earlier because he can't wait that long?
I don't know. I've been asked about that 50-day number, and I think it's something he just pulled out of a hat. I don't know if there's any reason, and who knows why he said he was going to make it happen sooner. Perhaps he just thought it sounded tough. I'm not sure that there was any serious thought behind it. It's amazing, actually, how little people believe, that he's actually going to make good on these threats. It seems like the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, they just seem to be completely unfazed by this. And you can see it by, the fact that the markets aren't in turmoil. If it was expected that we're going to go right back into another economic war with China, remember that the markets were in turmoil when he actually launched that war. And that turmoil, I think, is what brought him to his senses. And so, he rolled back the tariffs. They're still pretty high, but they're much, much lower than where he had them, from 145% to 30%, right, for China. And he's going to go back and do that again? I don't think so. Again, the markets don't think he's going to do so, and including also the oil futures market. If the people who trade oil, this is what making predictions about the future is. That's their living. That's how they make their money. These are the guys, they have the money riding on it. They have every reason to get it right. They need to. They do the research. Oil prices aren't spiking. There's just, you don't see it happening. Nobody thinks it's going to happen. Nobody believes them. So it just seems to be an empty threat. And I just don't think, if he goes ahead and does it, it's going to be suicidal, I think. It's going to be he's going to be shooting himself in the foot, and he'll have to back down. It'll be a real disaster for him.
Yeah, it's just such a bad look on Trump as well, because, the whole justification for bombing Iran is that, I gave a 60-day timeline. And then on day 61, while negotiations were still scheduled with the United States,
right,
he does this attack.
Right.
And now he's like, okay, I'll do another deadline, 50 days. Now he just immediately changes it. And he does this with so many other numbers. So it's just like,
yeah,
you just don't know. I'm kind of, but like you said, Trump is kind of out of options. I feel like, and if he's talking a lot with people like, Lindsey Graham and that Blumenthal character, it's like, maybe he will, it seems like Graham does have his ear, and that guy is just insane. He's just a complete madman.
He's really excited, right? He just seems to be, he's in a state of great, excitement over this. This is something that he feels like this is a dream come true for him. We're now going to really take it to the Russians and the Chinese, right? And we're going to make them pay. We're going to make them hurt. And we're going to, I guess in his mind, we're reestablishing, American hegemony. It was those weak Democrats, that have allowed those tin pot dictators to defy our power. And now we're going to let them know who's boss. Bone crushing sanctions. We're going to restore, fear, abject fear of the United States again. He's quite excited about this. But again, it's just like the people who have the money riding on it don't believe it's going to happen, and I don't believe it's going to happen either. If they do, if they're so foolish enough, like you say, if he actually really believes Lindsey Graham, and what Lindsey Graham claims that he got 81 senators to sign up to his bill, of course Trump is we're not talking about the bill, it's sort of his own version of it, but the bill is there still in the background. It just seems to me incredible.
I'm kind of hoping
81. The fact that you have 81 senators who actually thought that this was a sensible thing to do, it just tells you just how stupid the people are that run this country, or how abysmally ignorant they are. They have just so little understanding of markets and of other countries, and they shouldn't be running a great country like ours, but they are.
Right. Once again, we're so screwed, right? It's 81 senators out of 100 are on board for something this idiotic and suicidal. Then, we're in trouble. But part of me is actually hoping that this does happen, because this could potentially, bring down the empire without going nuclear, without a huge war. I feel like, okay, just do the sanctions. Russia isn't afraid of it. China's not afraid of it. No, India's not afraid of it. Just do it. It'll make America look really stupid and really weak. And then maybe we'll be able to, shake some reality into our leaders and say, like, hey, you don't get to dictate reality around the world anymore. Take care of your own damn country. There's a lot of problems here. Just focus at home, okay? Like I hope we can shake shake some sense into them when that happens. So do it, I say.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, there you have it. There's a relatively rosy scenario. We don't have to. It doesn't have to end in a nuclear holocaust. Yeah, right. Maybe
job.
There's.
I did it.
Right. Exactly.
Economic collapse, hooray! Our ticket out.
Right. Yeah. I would go for economic collapse any day. That gives us a chance, like you say, to reassess and maybe to just turn around the ship of state and head off in a much more reasonable direction.